So to get started working on the top of our table, I've planed up one face of 2 boards, just like I had done for all the other parts. So I've got one face that is flat and straight, no twists. Use winding sticks, 4-plane and tri-plane, to plane these from rough. The other face is still rough sawn. I also planed the edges, and I just cleaned them up. I didn't really do any type of precision joining on those edges yet. But what I want to focus on here is that I paid close attention to which direction these boards planed best in, and I marked it on the face of each board, and I also marked it on the edge of each board, because when I put this together, I want to try and arrange these boards so that both boards have the grain running in the same direction, so that when I go to plane this assembled top later, this glued up top, I don't have grain running in opposite directions on either board. In addition to that, I want to, when I match these boards up, I'm looking for a good grain match. So if I put them this way, that didn't work out too well. Flip them around and whatnot. This is the grain match that worked out best for me, orienting the boards this way. And as a side benefit, the grain on those two adjoining edges happen to be running in the same direction. So that's going to work out well for me when I go to plane these 2 boards together. So let's talk about how we're now going to prepare these boards for gluing into a wide panel. With the 2 faces flat and all the wind removed from those 2 boards, I now want to take these 2 boards. I know this is the seam that I'm going to glue together. So I'm going to take these 2 boards and I'm going to fold them closed like a book. And I'm going to do what's called match planing. I'm going to put these in my vise, and I'm going to take my joiner and I'm going to plane these 2 edges at the same time. Now with the 2 boards, I aligned the 2 edges as best I could, and the 2 boards are clamped side by side with those 2 planed faces together in the vise. Now I want to joint these 2 edges together. By joining the 2 edges together, I cancel out any error from 90 degrees, any error from square. So if the resulting edge here of these 2 boards is not exactly 90 degrees, it won't be a big deal, because when we open these 2 panels back up and align them, the 2 angles are going to be complementary to each other, and we're guaranteed a flat panel regardless of what those angles are. So as I mentioned in previous episodes, in order to make this edge straight, the easiest way is to start with a hollow or a concave edge. So I start just by planing a little in the center until my plane stops taking a shaving. Then what I'm going to do is lengthen my stroke. And now I'm still not planing the ends. I'm still maybe planing from here to here. And I like a straight iron in my joiner plane. This is actually not my tri-plane. This is an even longer joiner plane that I use a straight iron in when I'm match planing like this. So this iron has no camber on it at all. And that's just to get me a good flat glue joint. Okay, now that my plane really isn't cutting in that center, I'm going to start to take full length strokes. And I'm going to do this once or twice until I get a full length shaving off both boards from one end to the other. Making sure to follow good planing mechanics, starting with the pressure on the toe of the plane at the start, gradually transferring pressure of the plane to both hands as I go through the stroke, and towards the end I can remove the pressure from this hand because I don't want to push that plane off the edge and cause a dip at the end. And what I'm looking for is 2 continuous unbroken shavings, from one from each board, from end to end. Okay. Now, with both of those boards planed together, I should be able to take this out, again, open it up like a book, and sit one board on top of the other and get a seamless joint. So that joint is flat. There's no gaps from one end to the other. It is flat, and the panel itself is perfectly straight up and down. There's no concaveness or no cupping to this panel because the angle of the 2 boards, again, as I mentioned before, is complementary to each other. So when we open that panel up, it creates a perfect flat glue up. So we can go ahead and, as I did with the rub joint for the knee blocks, I'm going to use hot hide glue, and I'm going to assemble this panel with hot hide glue and a rub joint. Alright, so with the so again, just as I did with the knee blocks, I'm going to use hot hide glue and a rub joint to glue these boards together. And I'm not going to be too careful with the glue here, and I'm going to work very quickly because hot hide glue is going to start to gel real fast. And once it starts to gel, then it doesn't stick very well. You can heat up your workpiece to help you, give you some longer working time with the glue. So I'm going to put this on here, and I'm just going to start rubbing this back and forth. And that's it. I will leave the 2 boards in the vise overnight for that glue to set up, and then I can come back tomorrow and clean it up. So the glue on the top is dry, and we had a little problem with the glue up last night. Apparently it was a little bit too cold in my shop last night, and the hot hide glue was gelling before I could get the 2 boards together. So the joint didn't pull up as tightly as I would have liked, and there's a distinct glue line there, and you always get a distinct glue line with hide glue, but this is more open than I want, and I can even see a few gaps in there where the glue gelled. So if this were yellow glue, we'd kind of be up the creek. We'd have really no other choice but to rip this board back open and then redo everything. But because it's hide glue, again, one of the big benefits is that it's reversible. So I can just take a kettle of some hot water here and pour it on that glue joint. So I'm going to do that, and I'm going to let it sit for a couple minutes to let that water get into that joint. And that hot water is going to soften up that glue and allow us to separate that joint so that I can clean up the old glue and redo the joint. Now the solution to this problem is either one, to heat up or warm up the boards, warm up the wood before applying the glue, either with a heat gun, or if you have a stove, a wood stove in your shop, you can put them close to the wood stove. A hair dryer would probably work in a pinch. Just some way to heat up the wood on those edges so that you can get the wood warm enough that it's not setting the glue as soon as the glue hits. Or you can just do what I'm going to do and go ahead and do your joint with liquid hide glue, which isn't going to set up in the cold. And I'm going to warm that liquid hide glue up a little bit, and then it will set right into this joint and everything will pull nice and tight. So can't always get it right the first time, but knowing how to fix it is half the battle. So once this sits for a couple of minutes and softens up this glue, we should be able to separate this joint. So there we go. I was able to soften up that glue and separate that joint, and now I can just go ahead and clean up these edges, and if I have to, I can rematch plane them, and then go ahead and redo the glue up. So, you know, little setback, but again, really no big deal when you're using hide glue.
So after the glue dried, I cleaned up the squeeze out with a card scraper and then scribed the final thickness around all 4 edges of the panel with a marking gauge. I then planed the rough side of the panel down to the gauge line, starting with the foreplane planing across the grain, and finishing with the triplane diagonal to and along the grain. I then used a story stick to mark the final width of the panel in 2 locations, and then I connected these points with a straight edge. I could have also used the panel gauge here, but mine's in the shop. After marking the width, I planed to the line with a foreplane and triplane because there just wasn't enough waste to require ripping it off with a saw. I then scribed a square line across one end with my knife. Then I used the story stick to transfer the final length to the panel. I square the final width across the panel and take it to the saw bench to cut it to length. With a sharp saw and a light touch, letting the saw do the work, sawing 1/8 of an inch off is no problem. But you can't force the saw. The other end is much faster.
So I got one last pattern that we're going to use, again made out of my 1/4 inch poplar, based on the proportions in the design notes for the tabletop, and this is just one side of the corner. And the way I made this pattern, this edge here is perfectly square to this edge, so that I can use a square on the side, the flat square straight side of the table, and line the pattern up and make sure that everything is aligned. So once I have the pattern, again, just like I did before with all the other ones, I use the square in this case to get it in place. Go ahead, trace it on. Now I'll take the pattern, flip it over, use the square again to line up the other side of the corner. And after I have the corners drawn in, then I'll just take a straight edge and connect the straight sections. Now, before we go and saw this out, a good idea is to flip it over and mark for the table itself. Now, an easy way to do this is to line up the edge of the table with the outside edge of the top. Then take your dividers, and I'll turn this around. So we've got the one edge lined up with the outside edge of the top. So I'm going to take my dividers and I'm going to divide this space in half. A little more. Almost there. Right there. I'm going to leave a mark there. I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. Now that I've got it marked, I'll turn it around and I'll come in from the edge, leave a mark. Then we'll repeat it here. I'll line up the apron with the outside edge over here, and it should be the same, but we'll double check anyway. Divide it in half. Yeah, it's a little bit slightly different, but very close. Leave a mark there. Move the base out of the way. Come in on the other side. Leave a mark. Now we can take a big square and draw in the edges on the underside of the table here. And this will tell us later on where to line up the edges of the aprons. And for these edges, I'm just going to use a marking gauge. So now, later on when we go to attach this, it becomes very easy to line it up. Right where it's got to go.
I start sawing out the top by making some relief cuts with the back saw. Then I saw the curves with the bow saw. I also saw the straight stepped area with the bow saw as well. I then clean up the sawn edges with spoke shave, file, and I use a chisel to get down into the tight corners.
And don't tell me when I said so, but the chainsaw files, the small mill files, and the small needle files that you can get at places like Home Depot and Lowe's may be designed for filing metal, but they're really hard to beat when it comes to smoothing out the grain of these curves and taking away the tool marks, especially on these end grain areas. No sandpaper is going to give you the kind of finish that you can get from these tools. And if it bothers you to use a file designed for metal on a piece of wood, think of it as just a row of tiny little scrapers. So So once we have all of the curves fared down to our pattern lines again, we could call this done. You could stop there, attach it to your base, maybe give it a light sanding, and it'll be ready for finish. I mean, it's really a nice top the way that it is. But I'm going to take mine one step farther, and I'm going to put a slight radius on the edges all the way around, just to soften them up a little bit and give the edges a nice little detail. So, but I don't want a full round bullnose type look to this edge. I just want it to be sort of a subtle radius. It's going to be, you know, a much greater radius than this here. So what I'm going to do is I took a compass and I set it to about 1/8 of an inch, and I actually brought the pencil point down a little bit lower than the point of the compass, and I'm going to take this compass and use it as a scribe, and I'm going to scribe a line 1/8 of an inch up from the edge all the way around this top. And using the compass allows me to turn the corners and scribe into all the small corners, scribe around the corners here, the rounded corners, and follow that 1/8 of an inch all the way around. And I'm going to do this on both sides of the top. I'm going to do it on the top, and I'm also going to do it on the bottom. Alright, so after scribing around the front, the top, and the bottom, 1/8 of an inch in, I reset my dividers to scribe exactly halfway down the thickness, and scribe that all the way around. So what I'm going to do now is go back to my files, and I'm going to put a gentle radius, sort of like we did with the legs, where we rounded the legs using our guidelines. Well, we're going to use these guidelines to put a gentle radius from the center point of the edge to that 1/8 of an inch line around the top and the bottom. So that's just going to give us a gentle curve to the edges. And be careful doing the areas around the corners here. This is really where it's going to be trickiest. Around the corner curves and around the straight edges here shouldn't be too bad. Around here we need to be a little bit more careful, because around these points is where it's going to be the trickiest. So I'm going to go back. I'm going to use, again, spoke shave, chisel, file, rasp, whatever you have that'll work. Carving gouge would work too, to get into some of these tight corners. What's also going to be helpful is to have a scraper with a concave edge, so that we can dress those corners. And this radius here is going to be very close to what the actual radius of that edge is going to be. So this scraper is going to come in handy for smoothing out that radiused edge. So I mentioned that this part here is probably I don't want to say the most difficult, because really it's not difficult to put this radius on these edges. You can see, I mean, really this is just spoke shave, file, and scraper work along these edges. But where it gets a little bit technically tricky is down in this area. And not so much because it's difficult procedure to do, just because you have to sort of visualize how these two curves meet each other. So you've got, right now this is flat, but what we're going to end up with is a convex curve on both sides that have to then meet each other. So while right now this is the bottom of that V, because we're going to be curving these are actually going to meet much farther down than there. And really the easiest way, and really the only way that you can do this, is to carve it. But I don't want you to get nervous about, when I talk about carving. It's not carving like, ball and claw, Newport shell type carving. Really, we're just trying to make this radius here follow the path down. So you can do this all with a standard bench chisel, straight chisel. I'm going to use a number 5 gouge, carving gouge, just because I have it, and I think the profile helps a little bit. And really, so how I do this is to sort of knock the corners off first. And I've already have it shaped on this side, so I'm sort of trying to, when I shape this, I want to try and follow that same arc, that same shape that I have on this side when I do here. So I start just by knocking the corners off, and you can see right away where this material needs to be removed. As we bring these corners down, don't worry, I'm not in any danger of cutting myself here. My wrist, I know I'm zoomed in kind of far, but my wrist is planted, and I'm just sort of using finger pressure to move the gouge, so there's no chance of me cutting myself. And you can see as I start to bring the gouge down, taking this material away, I start dropping the corner where they meet. Again, they're meeting below where the drawing originally had them. So now you can see sort of how the curves force them to meet lower. And you just sort of continue this way with the gouge for as much as you can, just taking thin paring cuts, or again with the bench chisel you can do this as well. Just taking light paring cuts to sort of shape this. And if you can work straight from the gouge here, it really helps do as little filing on this as possible, because you're not going to be able to get the file right down deep into the corner. I'll go down in there with a scraper later, but I try and do as much of this with the gouge or the chisel as I can, so that I have very little cleanup down deep in that corner. And because I'm sort of heavy-handed to the outside edge, after I finish this corner, I'll turn the board around in the vise to do the back corner and come in from the other side. And just a little bit of light cleanup with the file, and a nice junction there between the two curved surfaces. So once the edges have a nice radius on them and nicely rounded over, the last thing I did before giving the top the final planing was to glue on a couple of glue blocks. And I just rubbed these on with hot hide glue, and I drilled some elongated holes in them, situated so that they're oblong across the grain of the top, to allow the top to expand and contract and move with the seasons. And these don't have to be pretty, any old scrap will work, don't even have to be the same species. And again, you just rub them on with a little hide glue and drill and file some elongated holes for the screws to attach the top. Once that's done, we'll go ahead and do the final planing of the top, and we'll be ready for finish. Alright, so there it is. I'm pretty pleased with it. This was a first porringer top for me, and I'm pretty pleased with the way that it came out. I always like to try and do something different with the projects that I build, learn something new. And for me, the porringer top was a first for this one, and I'm pretty pleased with it. So thanks for sticking with me for this long, and I hope you enjoyed the project. And next time I'm probably I'll be finishing this up. I think we're going to do a pretty simple finish that I think just about anyone's capable of doing. And other than that, we can call this piece done. So I hope you enjoyed it, and we'll stick around for the finish, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for watching.